Entitled parents got a disturbing call from their daughter, almost getting murdered and dying from bleeding out, and they berated her for disturbing their sleep, forcing their daughter to get herself to the ER. Now having a meltdown, the daughter did not show up and didn't give her support while they were putting down their dog, now realizing she went NC long before. Today is the anniversary of being nearly murdered, and I feel so alone in my pain. Basically, none of my loved ones besides my spouse gives a F, and I have no one to tell. So here I am. I've been dreading this day every single day for this past horrible year. I have my husband, who cares very deeply and was really affected by this. But he's basically it. So I'm just gonna write it down here because, why the F not? And I have no one else to talk to. Last July 18th, I was having a great day. I went crabbing with my brother and his best friend, who was visiting from out of town. At the end of a good crabbing session, we packed everything up in my brother's car and headed home at about 10:30 p.m. I'd just gotten back into Pokemon Go and was riding shotgun, catching Pokemon. My head was turned to the right, and I was looking down. We were driving along, my brother driving and his friend in the back seat. It was a normal night. Not really many cars on the road. This night was no different than any other. Then suddenly we heard an explosion, and I heard a scream that sounded like a dying animal. I realized it was coming from me, and I had massive pain in my head and left shoulder, and couldn't move my arm at all. Did the radio explode? Did we just get into an accident? No, the car was still driving along, and I realized, through the glass shards in my eyes, that there was a massive hole in the windshield right in front of my face. We were moving at about 65 miles per hour, and all I could hear once the screaming stopped was the wind, loud as F as it whistled through the hole, and the surreal, deafening silence that surrounded it. My city had been under attack for some time. I found out later that there'd been 200+ assaults on vehicles that summer, where people were throwing large rocks and other SHT at cars from the sides of the freeway. For mine though, some guy decided to F up my life further that night by dropping a massive rock from a 50-foot overpass tunnel entrance, through the windshield, directly into my head, while my body moved at 65 miles per hour. The rock would have hit my square in the face, if I hadn't been playing Pokemon Go, and hadn't been looking down and to the left. It hit me in the left side of my skull, then bounced onto my shoulder and back to my head, striking me a third time behind my ear. I can't honestly describe how I felt. Once I realized what had happened, I calmly called 911 for myself, knowing I only had a few minutes left to call my husband and say goodbye before my brain swelled, and I died right there in my brother's car. I asked my brother and his friend if they were hurt, and was so grateful I'd been chosen and not them. As we were crossing the bridge that connected my island to the mainland on the other side of the tunnel, I felt strangely calm. I'm always calm in the face of death, and this wasn't the first time for me. It was a beautiful night, warm and silent besides the whistling of the wind through the hole in the windshield. I'd been happy that day, a rarity for me. I'd caught a lot of crabs too. The car crossed the bridge, and my brother pulled over at the soonest exit. I called my husband on the way there, telling him that I was okay, that I'd be fine, that I hadn't lost consciousness. It was a lie, besides the consciousness part. But I didn't want the last thing my husband heard from me to be me screaming or freaking out. The ambulance met us at the exit, and at that point, I started to have what we thought was a seizure. Turns out it wasn't. I was going into shock, which came with violent shaking that resembled convulsions. I remember laying in that seat, seeing the emergency lights flashing, and the door opening to reveal several EMTs and a couple of state troopers. Behind them was my husband's face. He looked calm and loving. He's always been my rock. He didn't want my last moments to be seeing his face in panic. I smiled at him and focused really hard on trying not to give in to the shock or lose consciousness. I thought of my best friend who lived nearby, of the past 10 years that we'd spent together, and how everything with him had gone to SHT because of his addiction. I thought of my parents. The EMTs were trying to figure out how to move me to the stretcher, and because I had glass shards all over my neck, they couldn't put a neck brace on me. My neck didn't hurt, so I was fairly confident my neck wasn't broken. I stabilized my own head, looked straight forward, got up, and laid myself down on the stretcher, because that was all we could do. My husband stood by in silence, and I looked at him and reassured him everything was going to be fine. Those might have been my last words. When I got into the ambulance, a state trooper had shown up and was photographing me and my horribly F'd up shoulder for the investigation. Of course, they hadn't caught the person who dropped the rock, and in my SHT hole of a city where crime now runs rampant, they never would. After I was strapped in and ready to go, my husband got into the shotgun seat of the ambulance, and I told him to call my parents. My mom didn't answer, so he called my father, who has always been a total piece of SHT, who really wouldn't care if I was here or not. He picked up, and my husband handed me the phone through the little window. After I told him what happened, he was just annoyed. It's 11 o'clock at night, and we have to wake up early tomorrow. We can't talk to you now, and Mom is already in bed, he said. I told him there might not be a tomorrow, and said I just wanted to talk to my mom. He angrily handed her the phone, and as she complained about it being late, I heard him yelling at her to hurry up in the background. I told my mom exactly what happened, but I lied through my teeth and reassured her that I was going to be fine. I told her I just wanted to send her the pictures of the crime scene and my injuries. She complained that her phone was plugged in the bathroom, and she was already in bed. I eventually got her to look, and her reaction was as if I just told her I got a fish hook through my thumb. She then asked, "Did you catch any crabs though?" When we got to the ER, it was overfilled with mostly COVID patients. They didn't put a mask on me before wheeling me in. I was going to die anyway, so it didn't really matter much. I lay in that bed, my body feeling like it had been run over, for 3 hours. No one washed the glass from my eyes. No one checked on me after the X-rays and CT scans. They refused to give me anything for the pain, and finally showed up the last hour with some Tylenol. I think I actually laughed. My husband stayed by my side, calmly talking with me the whole time. I realized in that moment that this was the summary of my life. My husband was the only one there as I lay in what I thought was my deathbed, and I had never felt so effing alone. After I was taken to get X-rays and a CT scan, I called my best friend of 9 years, who lived 5 minutes from the hospital. I told him what happened, and he freaked out, asking me if I wanted him to come. How the F was I supposed to respond to that? I was like, "If you want, you can." He was broke, so I told him we'd call him a lift. Another hour passed by, and he never showed up. My husband texted him after that hour, and he told us he was just getting in the shower. Somehow the test came back, and I hadn't broken anything or gotten any brain damage. No one could possibly understand this, but I wasn't happy. All I had to show for this was huge bruising and soft tissue damage. Before this, I'd suffered almost my whole life with self-harming ideation, debilitating PTSD from so many horrible events in my life, and a failed self-harm attempt, as well as several other chronic disabilities, both psychiatric and physical. I was bitter I'd survived. I knew I'd have to live with what happened for the rest of my life, while to everyone else besides me and my husband, it was just a neat story that they'd forget about in a few days. Another experience for me to relive over and over every day, till the day I die. Yay. As I was discharged, I told my best friend over texts to not bother coming at that point, because I was going home. The next 2 weeks consisted of me laying in my bed in the dark, sleeping mostly, and bawling to myself for the few hours I was awake each day, while I tried to bring publicity to the assaults. I made a petition to try and get the city to put up nets or something effing anything, because we were all playing effing Russian roulette, and there had been over 200 assaults that summer. It was effing pointless, and it went nowhere. I was just made fun of by hundreds of strangers online. I left the house once to do a requested news interview after my post about the assault went viral on Facebook. I ended up being on the news twice, and on the radio once for an interview. I had a stranger tell me in a Facebook comment that he was tired of hearing about how all females have trauma and PTSD, that I should stop self-diagnosing myself. I am very professionally diagnosed, and that the problem was that I was soft and needed to get over what happened because no one cares. I've been questioned by people about the validity of my story. I've been asked by my brothers if I'm sure I was actually hit in the head, and questioned about why it affected me so much since all I got was just a bruise. I was told by hundreds of people how lucky I was that I didn't suffer permanent injuries or die. How I should be grateful, that out of millions of cars, mine had been targeted, and that out of all the places the rock could have landed, it landed directly on my head. No one understands how effing infuriating it is to be told you're lucky after something like this happens. If a woman tells you, "Hey, I was drugged and forced to perform oral sex on my rapist," or "I was molested as a child," do you tell her, "Oh man, you're so lucky you weren't actually sawed though"? Which honestly I've also been told several times in my life, go figure. Nobody effing understands how insensitive it is to tell a survivor that they're lucky. And guess what? Because they mean the best, all I get to do is swallow the hurt, thank them, and be told off for complaining about people trying to be nice. My husband, my high school sweetheart and legal caregiver who I've been with for half my life, stayed so strong for me for so long, which I feel effing terrible about. But after about 5 months, he couldn't hold it in anymore, and effing broke down for a couple of weeks. He tried so hard to not make it about him, but he's effed up from it too. He drove so fast to meet the ambulance that night because he wanted to see me alive one last time. In the 2 weeks following, I ate a few pieces of meat one day. That's literally it. One meal in 2 weeks. I felt that if I left that bed, I wouldn't be safe. And since then, any time I leave, I'm fully expecting to be suddenly violently assaulted or killed. My alcoholic ex-bestie couldn't give me a good reason as to why he didn't bother showing up. But after what I found out about him, and how bad of a state he really was in before I cut him out of my life for good, I'm not shocked at all. That's a story for another time. But in case he reads this, F you, man. You're literally the worst best friend someone could ask for, and a SHTTY, effing useless person. I'll add that many months later he stayed at my house to help me, as I was about to be hospitalized for my eating disorder, and stole hundreds of dollars, weed, and alcohol from my husband and me to fuel his addiction. That was the last straw before I cut him out for good. My parents never called to ask me if I was okay after that. And after a couple of months, my mother freaked the F out because I wouldn't fly across the country with 1 day's notice to have her dog put down, regardless of what I was going through, because she couldn't stomach it. I effing lost it. I told her that she hadn't bothered to come to my state when her child was likely dying at the hospital, and that it was absolutely effing ridiculous that she had the audacity to be pissed at me for not being able to accommodate a $600 plane ticket to fly out the next day to have her dog put down when I was about to host guests. After she assured me her and my father's reactions were my fault because I sounded so calm on the phone and played the situation down, we went without contact for months. It turns out she was diagnosed with a disease that affects her reasoning shortly after though, so I guess I'm not even allowed to hold it against her, right? She ended up apologizing for her behavior eventually, and I let her back into my life. So after being nearly murdered, I lost my best friend and parents for a while too. My brother has always had issues with empathy. When I told my brother after getting back home that I had a feeling the reality of what happened was going to hit me like a truck the next day, and that I'd be sad, he looked at me quizzically and said, "I don't understand why you'd be sad about it. If it were me, it wouldn't really affect me at all." There wasn't even anything I could really say about that. There's no point in trying to explain what I was feeling to someone that couldn't possibly understand. I spent the next year with my eating disorder spiraling out of control, with reliving the pain of what happened happening over and over again anytime something fell in the kitchen. I heard or saw glass breaking, or heard a loud, sudden noise. Every time I get in a car, anytime I see a effing car, anytime I see an overpass or drive under one. It took me months to be able to ride on the freeway again. And every time I leave my island to go to the city, on my way back I have to drive right under where I almost lost my life. There was no justice for this. The person who almost killed me was never caught. Life goes on, and I've lived every day alone in the effing hell that is my head, with my husband as my only support network. Don't even ask me about how therapy went. BTW, that's a whole long other story I'm not going to get into. I look totally freaking fine. I've got some scarring in my tissue on my shoulder that you can't see. I'm the image of a perfectly healthy, beautiful, lucky, and happy woman. Today, I told my mom on the phone that I was sad because it was the anniversary of the attempted murder. She looked at me and said, "It's not an anniversary because it's not something worth remembering. Thanks for reading my story, stranger. Tomorrow you'll have forgotten all about this neat little tale on Reddit about a reality that's so far from what you can imagine that it sounds like bullshit." Update. 1 month later. A couple nights ago, I had a nightmare about it. I just feel alone in my head and figured I'd get it off my chest as I lay here at 6 and not being able to sleep. If you want to read the really dark, gory details, you can find the full long story on my other account. For some reason, I can't post the full thing here. Look at the only post on the profile of Reddit user, throwaway 4 sad things posted to this subreddit. True off my chest. But long story short, I was riding shotgun in my brother's car when someone dropped a large rock off a 50-foot overpass through our windshield while we drove along at 70 miles per hour. I was hit in the side of the head, then in the shoulder, then again in the head when the rock bounced off. I had to call 911 for myself and went into shock and was rushed to the ER. My husband and I were 100% thinking I was going to die from my brain swelling. My family and best friend basically didn't give a SHT. Parents didn't fly out to see me. My best friend at the time didn't bother showing up when he lived 5 minutes from the ER. I somehow didn't have fatal injuries, but it took 6 weeks to heal. I've always had severe PTSD from many other traumatic events, and that was just a new thing to add to it. I feel really alone in my head often. The other night I was falling asleep and suddenly had a dream that something hit me in the head, triggering flashbacks and startling me awake. Thanks for listening. I had therapy today, and I wasn't looking forward to talking about it. Update. 3 months after OG post. Edit. Crime scene injury photos and long full story in the comments. I'm in trauma therapy for all of this, so I'm doing what I can from that perspective. Still helps to vent what happened. You'll see in my history I repost this occasionally when it's on my mind and I feel I need to get it off my chest. Please don't tell me I'm lucky for surviving. I'm not lucky. I'm freakishly unlucky if anything, and when people tell me I'm lucky I wasn't injured worse, I want to punch them. Just going to keep posting about this whenever I'm sad about it. A couple months ago, I had a nightmare about it. I just felt alone in my head and figured I'd get it off my chest as I lay here at 6 in the morning, not being able to sleep. If you want to read the really dark, gory details TBH, so it would mean a lot to me if anyone would read the full thing. But it's long. You can find the full long story on my other account. For some reason, I can't post the full thing here. The link is in the comments below. Or you can look at the post on the profile of Reddit user, throw away 4 sad things posted to True of Mitchest. But long story short, I was riding shotgun in my brother's car when someone dropped a large rock off a 50-foot overpass through our windshield while we drove along at 70 miles per hour. I was hit in the side of the head, then in the shoulder, then again in the head when the rock bounced off. I had to call 911 for myself and went into shock and was rushed to the ER. My husband and I were 100% thinking I was going to die from my brain swelling. My family and best friend basically didn't give it SHT. Parents didn't fly out to see me. My ex-best friend didn't bother showing up when he lived 5 minutes from the ER. I somehow didn't have fatal injuries, but it took 6 weeks to heal. I've always had severe PTSD from many other traumatic events, and that was just a new thing to add to it. I feel really alone in my head often. The dream I had happened as I was falling asleep, and suddenly I had a dream that something hit me in the head, triggering flashbacks and startling me awake. Thanks for listening. I just need to keep telling the story every once in a while. It feels better. Update. 1 year after OG post. Second yearly update. I was almost killed in an attempted murder a couple years ago. But now, about a year ago, turning 32. Birthday this month, posted a 1 year update since I was almost killed in a random act of violence. I had mixed responses from people on here. Some were very kind and gave words of comfort, and I thank those of you who did, if you remember me, and some were cruel and accused me of faking the story for attention, because I wouldn't provide photos or evidence since it would dox my real identity. I was on the news 3 times with those photos, my name, and details completely public. At the 1 year mark, I was in a very dark place and hadn't received trauma therapy specifically for the incident. The hurtful comments on here and in the comments of the news articles were discouraging, and after people started finding my information and posting it in the comments on Reddit, I deleted my post. It took 6 months this year to get my name removed from the news articles, but they're finally anonymous. I said last time I'd update in a year, so here I am. 2 years ago, someone threw a large rock off of a 50-foot overpass through the windshield of my friend's car on the freeway. I was riding shotgun and was struck in the side of the head, then the shoulder, then again behind the ear by the bouncing rock as we moved at about 70 mph. It was a random act of violence committed by a transient man and was at the end of a series of over 200 assaults on cars in my area that summer. A symptom of the SHT show that is the politics in my city. I went into shock, was rushed to the ER, and suffered a major concussion, damage to my shoulder, and severe bruising. While I went into shock and had violent tremors in the car and in the ambulance, my husband, friends, and I 100% thought I was going to die of a brain bleed. I had no support from anyone but my husband at the hospital and in the weeks to come. My parents didn't fly out and were just annoyed when I called them late from the ambulance. My ex-best friend didn't come to the hospital despite living 5 minutes from it. I didn't eat for 2 weeks, only slept 18 hours a day, and cried the remaining 6. I've spent 2 years living in fear of leaving my house, and my other already complicated mix of disorders worsened PTSD, anorexia, chronic pain, amongst other things. A year ago, I didn't think it would ever get better. I felt like I was screaming silently in my head, living in a hell no one else could comprehend. It's been a horrifying reality that I can't really explain unless you've been violently and severely injured by another person before. At the end of July this year, it was the 2-year anniversary of my assault. I spent almost a year in miserable trauma therapy EMDR, as well as continuing Roman 4 ketamine therapy that I've been getting for going on 5 years. Slowly, The side effects of the assault have faded a little. This year, I've been able to drive under the same underpass where I nearly left this earth without having severe PTSD symptoms. I've only been self-harming twice in the last year. A record since I was 15. I've struggled with regular self-harming ideation and attempts for 17 years. I've made new friends. I've gotten my eating disorder much more under control. I've cut my toxic piece of SHT of an ex-bestie out of my life. And today I started my new job as an executive assistant of a tech startup, and I haven't been able to work a regular job since 2011 due to health issues. I'm also a commercial voice actor and have been getting auditions in and booking gigs. My husband and I are going strong and are even thinking of having kids. We've been together for 14 years, married for 5. Oh, and he and I have gotten insanely good at Fortnite in a short period, statistically, and are going to start streaming soon. LOL gaming is my escape. I'm proud of myself. I'm not perfect, not even close, but I'm alive. And I think things might be okay. I think there's a chance of me living a normal life. And I don't care if you don't believe my story on this anonymous account. It won't change how far I've come. A year from now, I'll post my 3rd update. Thanks for reading. Update. 2 years after OG post. 3-year update. I was almost killed in an attempted murder and literally didn't leave my house for almost 3 years. I'm updating because there were several people who said last year that they were looking forward to my 3-year update. They requested I do one, so here I am. Long story short, I was nearly killed in the summer of 2021 when someone dropped a large rock off an overpass on the freeway, and it went through the windshield, hitting me in the head, then bounced onto my shoulder, and then again into my head behind my ear before falling into the footwell. I went into shock and was rushed to the ER, and I ended up with a bad concussion and soft tissue damage on my shoulder. I already had PTSD, but I developed massive PTSD specifically from this incident, and didn't leave my house almost ever for 2.5 years. Near-death experiences, violent trauma, really F up your perception of life, and you never feel safe again. I get a horrified feeling and intrusive thoughts about death and injury every day. A lot of people on here accused me of making it up. I got nasty comments telling me it was my fault, and that it must have been karma. I removed all my previous posts because when they blew up, people started attempting to dox my real identity with the reports. I even tried changing a few details in the 2nd-year update to make it less searchable, which got me once again accused of making my story up. And it took 6 months to get the media to remove my name from the reports. I learned to stay silent about it all to avoid the questions and criticism. I was petrified for 2.5 years, only leaving my house once every 3 weeks for doctor appointments. My husband would be the one to go to the grocery store, take the dogs outside or wherever, always. At the beginning of this year, I decided to force myself to leave my house and to really buckle down with my career. It was extremely difficult at first, and being outside felt foreign and dangerous. I'm a professional voice actor doing mostly commercials who works from a home studio, and I got agency representation in Los Angeles in January. Then I managed to get mentorship coaching from a very famous voice actor. They voiced the main character in a well-known kids show. And my husband and I ended up buying a lovely house in Los Angeles, so I can specialize in games and animation. I have my mentor, and now good friend to thank for being a huge part of where I got the inspiration and courage to get back on track with my career, which was severely interrupted by the assault. During the house hunting trip in Los Angeles, I shadowed my mentor in studio, while they recorded a Netflix anime. They play the MC. After they had me perform some lines in front of the casting director and director, I ended up doing background voices on that show. We're moving into our house in the next couple of months, and I can finally leave this effing place with these horrible memories. The only SHTTY thing is I was recently diagnosed with a pretty serious autoimmune disease that was worsened by the traumatic event, and that's been a huge obstacle for me, but I refuse to let it stop me from achieving my goals. What happened to me severely destroyed my life for 3 years, but this year I decided I was done letting it affect my career and holding me back. It still affects me every day, but now there are great things that I'm looking forward to in life. I'm effing determined to kick arse in my field. Thanks for reading. And for those who were kind to me the last 2 times I posted. Your words meant a lot to me.